So we're joined by the state director of the Mississippi AARP, my friend, Kimberly Campbell, graduate of three SEC institutions, which we will definitely talk about. Former state representative, former judge, former attorney, always having their hands in so many
Hmm.
legal affairs. We thank you so much for joining us today. This is our business law class. I've got a room full here with me at Velma Jackson High School. We're recording this for all of our friends in Madison County schools, including our friend April Majors over at Ridgeland High School, Madison Central, Germantown High School, my good friend Jennifer Coate over at the Academic Option Center, and our YouTube channel. So thank you so much for fitting us in your busy schedule.
Thank you for having me. I always look forward to this.
Now, obviously, we want to talk about all your incredible career. But let's just give us a little background. Went to Callaway High School, then you went to Mississippi State, then you went to Auburn, and then you went to Ole Miss. So you went to three SEC schools, all
Yes.
great institutions. So just give us a little background on that and kind of your transition coming from Callaway to these large major institutions.
Okay, great. I am a graduate of Callaway High School. I finished in 1990, which sounds like I'm ancient now, believe it or not. I left Callaway, and honestly, when I was looking for my bachelor's degree, my bachelor's institute, it was all about money. I'm not gonna lie, it was all about money. Who was going to give me the best scholarship, the best offers? Who could I go to, and I would come out either with no loans or with as least as possible. Now, I will also say I had some relatives that also came through Mississippi State. Some of them were some of the first African Americans to come through
Wow.
Mississippi State. So it was
Wow.
always, we were always, pretty proud of Mississippi State in the family. So when it came time, again, State came through in a mighty way. So I was like, well, this is definitely where I'm going. So I went to Mississippi State. I got my bachelor's in English from State. While at State, I always knew I wanted to go to law school. In fact, I was really between going to law school or getting my doctorate, my PhD in public policy. So I've always been, a person that was engaged in politics. I grew up that way. I came from a family that was very politically savvy and politically minded. In fact, some of our relatives were part of the civil rights movement in Mississippi. So that was always the plan. English, because I love English. That was my strongest area. And I always felt that a good, solid bachelor's in English could be a springboard for many different things. And so that's why I finished from State in English. After that, though, instead of going straight to law school, Auburn came calling, and Auburn sought me out for their communications program, which, as you can tell,
Wow.
I like to talk. I like PR and things along those lines. Okay. So I went to Auburn. While I was at Auburn, I taught undergraduate classes, which I absolutely adored. And I also mentored and was a tutor for many of the Auburn football team and Auburn basketball team members at the time, which is funny because later on in life, when I ran for office, some of those guys were then professional athletes. And believe it or
Wow.
not, they were some of my biggest contributors when I ran for office. They were like, oh, Miss Kimberly, we remember you because you stayed on us. You were serious about us getting our education. And so I finished Robert with my master's, and I actually worked for 3 years before I went to law school. And then I went to University of Mississippi. Again, they said, you can come and you don't owe us anything when you come. I said, well, that's exactly where I'm going then. But it's all been worth it. I think it all, I'm a person that believes in divine time and divine order. And I think that was all a part of what I needed to do. And all three of those institutions set the platform and the foundation for me to then go into where my career has been, whether it's been from being a policy analyst for the city of Jackson to being a city attorney for many smaller municipalities to being in the state house, being a House of Representative member for the state of Mississippi, to being a youth court judge, my own law practice, almost 20 years of being in a law practice of my own law practice, and then now in my current role as the state director for AARP Mississippi, which takes me throughout everything here. But I also spend a lot of time in DC at my national office, so I'm in between Mississippi and Washington DC.
Now, and that's so cool. And I think it's also cool to get to experience three different SEC campuses because we have so many kids that say, look, I want to go to
Yeah,
Mississippi State, I want to go to Ole Miss, I want to go to Alabama because they see the stuff on TV, they see the glitz and
yeah,
glamour of the football. I went to LSU And I have
Yes,
kids all the time. I
yes,
want to go to LSU like you did, football. Yeah, and that's fun. But these are not just easy schools. Like
correct.
LSU, very challenging academically for me. And
Absolutely.
I know Auburn, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and your programs, it was very challenging academic. So it's fun to go and enjoy that type stuff. But I don't think
Yes,
anybody needs to get away from the fact that these large state institutions, it is very easy to get lost in the shuffle because there's so many
yes,
students. You have got to
absolutely.
have great time management and great focus when it comes to getting that degree.
Absolutely. I would tell you, I think for the students that are listening, your teachers know you best, right? I think it's really important to listen to, your good teachers now. They give good sound advice. And also parents know their children. There are some children that can finish high school and they can go off to UCLA, which is a massive campus, and be absolutely fine. There are others that would struggle. And so I always say, know yourself, listen to good counsel, and it's absolutely okay if you go to a smaller institute. In fact, it's absolutely okay if you start off going to a community college. Don't get caught up into this. I'm trying to be out there with somebody else, or I've got to compete with somebody else. You want to make sure that you go to the place to where you're not going to be in debt, and also where you will be successful. If you're a student that knows, you know what, I might need to go to Holmes or Hines, because that will better prepare me so that I can then transition to whether it's an Alcorn, Jackson State, or Mississippi State, or LSU. Do what you need to do to make sure that you are successful. Because I will tell you, it's good to see the stuff that you see online about the games and the tournaments, even the parties. And I'm in a sorority, even one. All that looks really fun. But that is only about 2% of your life when you're at a major institution. Trust me on that. And if it's more than 2%, you're probably one of the ones that would not graduate. Like, I'm sure your teacher can tell you, we have all known people that was in school with us and never got their degree. So, I can correct. I came from a household where my parents were always like, look, yes, we want you to, grow up. It is a time for self-discovery. It is a time to have some fun. Absolutely. But never forget that your first goal is to get your degree. My parents were like, you are there to come home in 4 years with your bachelor's from Mississippi State. I was there at Auburn to come home in 2 with my master's degree. I was at Ole Miss to come home with my Juris Doctorate in 3. And actually, I came home in 2 years. I went through my doctor,
Wow.
my law degree pretty fast, actually. I was ready to get done and get to working and making some money, to be honest with you. But yes, you got to really be serious about your life and how you want to move through the world, because nothing is going to be given to you. In fact, it's probably going to be even harder than ever before. So you've got to be serious about how you want to operate in the world, and how you want to be successful.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned how you've been a city attorney, you've been a youth court judge, and we've had a few legal guests in this class, and we talked about, you hear attorney, you hear judge, and you're thinking law and order, you're thinking all rise. We see the courtroom
Yes,
dramas.
yes.
That is, but that is not
Mm-hmm.
something. That's such a small part of the legal system, and
Absolutely.
I think people kind of get scared when they hear attorney. There's a lot of things in your
They
life you're going
do.
to need an attorney for, and nobody's going to jail. There's a lot of things in your life you're going to need an
Absolutely.
attorney for that is only there to advance you.
That's
If you ever
right.
want to adopt a child, if you ever want to buy a home, buy a
Absolutely.
business, heaven forbid, if you ever get divorced,
Absolutely.
nobody's going to jail, but you have to have somebody to mediate that. So, just talk about some
Absolutely.
of the things that you have an experience in with law,
Sure.
and it has nothing to do with putting somebody behind bars.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. Everyone, when they think about law or they think about being an attorney, they merely think it's criminal court. It's SVU, it's law and order. And while that is a part of law, that is not everybody. That's only one segment. There's corporate law, there's family law, there's will and estates law, there's business law. I mean, law, there's property law. It runs the gamut. In fact, like my personality just said, I got my master's in communication. I like to talk. So, of course, I liked going to court. That was something that I enjoyed. I had some other friends that were in law school with me, and they were like, look, whatever I can do, just keep me out of court. That was not their thing. And so we laugh and call them paper pushers. But guess what? Those paper pushers make a whole lot of money, and they never step foot in a court in front of a judge. So it really does run the gamut. I mean, and whether you even practice or not, having a law degree, and especially if you pass the bar, you actually have your bar license. In fact, I'm licensed to practice in Mississippi as well as Maryland, as a matter of fact. That opens up so many other doors for so many other careers. I mean, it really is a great sounding board. But some of the areas I practiced in was tax law, which is very serious. I mean, it is very serious. You know, one thing you will learn, prayerfully, most people statistically won't ever touch the criminal system. That's our goal, young people. Prayerfully, most of us will not touch the criminal court system. But honestly, just about all of us will touch when it comes to contract law, will touch when it comes to wills and estate. And let me say something about wills, because people tend to think, oh, that's just for celebrities. That's just for people that are worth, $12 million or more. Absolutely not. I'm telling you, I have been in court with people, and you will be amazed how they will tear each other down for grandmama's house. They will tear each other down for, their daddy's collection of whatever. And so that's very important. And I tell people, I don't care what you think you have or don't. If you have a family, if you have children, especially if there are second marriages and, different children involved, you need to have a will, because you need to specifically say who you want to get what. And also, that's what things that we call a living will, which all of us are going to be there one day. Nobody wants to think about it, but God forbid you're incapacitated or you cannot think in the best interest of yourself. You want to be able to have stuff in place before you reach that point of someone trustworthy to say, if I'm incapacitated mentally or physically, I want my brother XYZ to handle this. I don't want so and so, because when things are not in line, we go by statutory, and statutory may look like, oh, if you're married, it's always going to be the spouse that's going to make the decision. Everybody doesn't treat their spouses like that. So, but unless you say otherwise, that's what it's going to be. Or we'll just split all this property, 50-50 between the three siblings. Well, let's say two siblings you haven't seen them in 20 years. And it's only been you or one other sibling that has taken care of your mom in all these years, that took on all these extra financial, business dealings. And so these are very important parts of law. I laugh with divorce. You're so right. Divorce look, let me tell you, if you have any resources, you want to know how to protect yourself. I even did a lot of, premarital, counseling with people. And we always think that these things are only for people with great wealth. But honestly, if you have a 401k, if you have stocks, if you have anything, you want to make sure you are speaking to who is going to get what in case the marriage does not work. And so I laugh and say, people sometimes say, oh, well, it's the most dangerous law if you're in a criminal court, right, with the defendants. And actually, I laugh, but not really. It's really family court. There have been more people that have actually been murdered or attacked or shot because of family court. Because family court deals with people's money and their children and their property. And people tend to lose all of their mind when it comes to their children, their money, and their property. Oftentimes, criminal attorneys will tell you that their clients typically love them. Whether they get them off or not, they absolutely do believe that their criminal defense attorney has done the best they could do for them. Yeah. Family law attorneys, you're sometimes in danger of your own client or sometimes the other person because they think as though you are the one that is ripping them of custody or money or so forth. And so, but there's banking law. There's school law. I used to be on the school board for the city of Jackson. Yeah. And we have our own attorneys when you're part of the school law. There are civil rights laws. We tend to think sometimes when people hear civil rights, they immediately think, oh, we're talking about Medgar Evers. We're talking about something that happened in the 50s or the 60s. Civil rights are happening right now, and it's not just a racial situation. And so you have those attorneys that are there to go to court if there's been someone or some entity that has infringed on your constitutional rights. And so it just runs the gamut. I mean, we could talk all day about the different things that you can do with law. In fact, when I was in the legislature, there are also, attorneys for the different committees that helped us draft our bills, that help us do our research. And so, again, those would be the type that I mentioned earlier that did not want to go to court. They're good about finding you the information and getting a well-crafted argument in front of you, but they didn't want to be in court. I was one, I'm a big researcher, but I love being in court. I mean, that was probably one of my, we're going to court. You're going to know that I was there representing my client quite well. So, yes.
Awesome. And that's a great segue because you mentioned your time in the legislature. You spent 8 years in the Mississippi legislature in Jackson, representing District 72. And
Correct.
and like you're on the front line making some of these state laws. And look, I
Yes.
always say, I remember all the way back to President Reagan. So I've seen
Mm-hmm.
presidents of both parties come through.
Yes.
And living in Mississippi, I don't
Yes.
remember any of these presidents ever being here unless they were asking for my vote or we had a natural disaster. So it is
Correct.
so important. I mean, obviously vote for the president, but it is so important,
Right.
to be aware about the local issues, know who your state representative is. And then something that I think so many people, including myself, admire about you is because we had Governor Phil Bryant during that time. And you remember the Democratic Party, but even though we
Yes.
had a Republican controlled Congress and a Republican governor, you were still on committee chairs because
Yes.
you were like, look, I'm not here to fight. I'm not here to, to get petty. I'm here to work together. And so many people that were Republicans have told me, look, I may not agree with Kimberly Campbell on every issue, but we can work together and she's going
Correct.
to listen to me. So let's put her in
Absolutely.
charge. So if I had Mayor Gene McGee here last week, and it was the same thing with him. He's been a
Yeah.
Republican mayor for 9 terms,
Yeah. He's a good
but he goes,
guy.
look,
He is. He's a
I'm
good
going to
guy.
work with Democrats and everybody
Mm-hmm.
because at the end of the day, we've got to help the people. So just
Yes.
talk about your experience on that because you did such a great job of being a great example of how
Thank you.
everybody can work together for the good of the people and not just their own self-interest.
Thank you. So, yes. So, and speaking of Mayor McGee, so District 72, especially at the time, now the lines have changed some, but at the time I had a large part of Ridgeland. And so he was one of my mayors during my legislative time. And so we worked together on quite a bit. And he's really a really good, stand-up guy. He really is. So yes, so I served in the legislature really almost 9 years. So I was there for 9 terms, 9 legislative sessions, not because a term is really 4 years, but for 9 legislative sessions. I left after doing one session of my third term. But yes, so one of the things that I am proud of is that everybody, I mean, not everybody, but most people would say that I was a person that was going to try to work with you. I was a part of that still old guard that we used to have that truly believed in being statesmen. Governor William Winter, who's no longer with us, you would just have to know. I mean, your teacher would have to tell you more about him, but he was such an amazing man. And actually, my mother was very good friends with him, and my mother worked on a lot of his educational stuff that he did when he was in office. So there's a long history there. My mother was actually a part of the cabinet with Governor Ray Mabus. Some of you, I'm sure. We don't know these people, but they were a part of really crafting who we are in Mississippi. So having said that, then I came from that. I came from, it's not about race. It's not, everything can't always be about black versus white. Everything can always be about, Republican versus Democrat. Of course, there were core ideals that I believe, like I'm a staunch public school supporter. So they knew if you come in with any bill that's gonna mess with public school funding or public schools, their whatever. I'm not your girl. You're not gonna get my vote for that. But I did also still believe in economic development, and it was astonishing to me that some people thought, well, if you believe in a Nissan coming, right, you can't possibly believe in public education or vice versa. And I was thinking, well, who said that? I mean, I can understand economic development because every county needs that. The state needs that for revenue. And if I'm a public school proponent, then that means I want people to have great jobs, for them to have, good lives once they finish school. So I was able to work with everybody. So whether it was when there was a Democrat that was the Speaker of the House, and quick for what that means is that the Speaker of the House is the one that determines the committee assignment. So when I first went in, it was Democrat power, and so of course I had top key roles. And then when it switched and became a Republican speaker, Philip Gunn was a very good friend of mine. And I still had very good committee assignments. And everybody would tell you it's because I'm a person that listens. And I really was a person that believed if we all come to the table, we can think of something that's really going to give me what you want, give you over there what you need, but overall would be what is best for the entire state and not just what me needs. And, I'm really sad by what I see now. I think we're starting to
Oh,
lose a lot of our old guard statesmen, and more of us that were in the middle of both parties. And I just think you have dysfunction when that happens, right? It just does not work well if no one understands the art of compromise anymore. Then we all lose. I mean, we would just all lose. But yeah, and so I've been, let's see, Judiciary B. I was co-chair of Judiciary B, and then I was chair of several different subcommittees because I did a lot of work with domestic violence and the youth court, and all that stuff was very important to me. I was chair of I was on banking committee. That was a very
wow.
influential and powerful committee to work on, and local and public private. That's really important because that's all about the money that Hinds County gets or the money that Madison County gets. And so, I mean, it's running together now, but yeah. And so the work that I was on universities and colleges committee, subcommittee chair for universities and colleges, and so I think that's important when you have people that does not shut anybody out. I was not one that there was no one that could not get a meeting with me. I just think you're an irresponsible leader if you only want to listen to people that look like you or think like you. And I think that's
Absolutely.
kind of some of the problems that we have in the world now, right? So yeah, so I believe in the art of compromise. I believe in listening to people, and I believe in crafting good, sound public policy and legislation that will help everybody in Mississippi, not just one little nugget of Mississippi that may look like me or think like me or live like me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, obviously, you've been in your role as president of AARP for what, 9 years now?
Yes, it's
Wow.
crazy. Yes,
Yeah.
9 years. The time runs. Yes.
So, obviously, I don't have anybody here anywhere near retirement age, but they may have grandparents that are at retirement age. And one thing with this class, I'm not expecting people to be attorneys, but I really want young
Right.
people to know the type of rights that they're going to have as employees, and as they get older, the things that
Absolutely.
federal law says that they're entitled to. So,
Hmm.
as the director of
Absolutely.
AARP, what are some things you do for the retired individuals of our state, and some things that they need to know about as they get older?
Right. Well, it's interesting because most people don't quite understand just how much AARP has evolved. And so, really, our demographic is really the 50 plus, and don't forget about the and their families. So, we play in a huge arena. We were playing in the arena of student loans, of trying to get, better policies around, forgiving some student loans for individuals. We played in the arena of, employment law, employment factors. We have a big push for intergenerational work. I have some events to where it's everybody because we believe it's, different generations make the best policies together. So it doesn't just need to be a room of 70-year-olds or a room of 60. Not look, I'm in my 50s. It doesn't need to be a room of just 50-year-olds. And so we work together better when we have intergenerational work and intergenerational policy. Of course, we play in the healthcare space. That's really big. We had a big push here to expand Medicaid. And remember now, that's not just because most people that are 65 or older have Medicare. And so that push Medicaid was really for those that fell beneath that. So that's how our thing is really for everybody. We do a big push with veterans, and people tend to think, oh, is veteran somebody that fought in Vietnam or World War II? Well, yes, but think about it. Right now in your class, you've got some parents, you've got some friends of some parents who are still serving or just got back from being deployed. They are still veterans. And so a lot of our work does also try to help them and their families. Of course, we do work around caregiving. Now, it's interesting. Caregiving has become more of a intergenerational piece of work than most people would ever recognize. And I'll tell you why. unlike in past generations where there was, in past generations, the course of life was people stopped working at a certain, age, and their children were gone, had finished college at a certain age, and they had probably done a few things for a little while just themselves before they then had to probably, take care of their mom or their dad. Well, now, because we do live differently, right? Many of us get married later, many of us have children later. And it's funny how I don't think we always thought about what that would mean later on. And so that's why we have a much wider, what we call the sandwich generation, where you have people that are still working, still have children in K through 12, and are now taking care of parents. I myself was one of them. I am 53, and I have four daughters. So the first two are they're done with college. One is an engineer. The other one is still finding her way, but she's a manager of a particular store. The other two, one is at Rosa Scott. The other one is at Madison Middle. So at 53, I'm still deep into parenting, right? From being cheerleader mom and band mom and soon to be volleyball mom. And at the same time, I'm fully in my work chapters, right? I'm still trying to make things happen in my professional life. Well, 5 years ago, well, probably even a little bit longer than that. And so my children were even much younger then. I moved my parents in with me. They were getting older. My mother was sadly on her fifth battle of cancer, and it was going to be her last battle. If I count from her first battle to the last, that was a 10-year span. So she had fought a really good battle. And it's crazy to say, I know, but I was at peace when she did transition, because I knew she had given us 10 years when they had actually said she would only give us like 6 months when she was first
Wow.
diagnosed. So she gave us 10 years and 5 different battles. But doing all that, I'm, dealing with, her appointments and her chemo and making sure she's getting everywhere she needs to be. Still, being, even though my dad is living, dad's the way of that. He's the healthiest 83-year-old you ever find. My dad still walks 5 miles a day to this day. He still walks 5 miles
Wow.
a day. I have my brother lives in Pennsylvania. Dad flies to him, jumps on his connecting flight. When he's there, he's driving those grandkids to all their appointments and stuff. So he's good. But I want to make sure that he's still good, especially his grief was hard on him. So it was more of taking care of his mental health during those years than even just his physical health. But I said it all to say then, caregiving looks very different now. It's no longer just, you may be 65 and kids been gone for a while, you've been out of work, and now you're taking care of mom, you have a little bit more time. It's very different when you're still in the thick of all those other responsibilities, and now you're having to take care of an aging parent. And actually, it's getting even younger. So some of our caregiving initiatives that we actually have college students. We have college students that, grandparent may have raised them, or maybe their parent had them later in life. And so they're having to deal with an ill one. We also have, I've got a few that are at Ole Miss, and they have siblings who are special needs. And they've already said, look, I already know I'm the one, right? I'm going to be the one. After my parents pass away, I will be the one that would take care of my sibling the rest of their lives. And so they're already like, so what policies do we need to make sure that we're advocating for now? How do we look at retirement? That's another thing. I tell people about retirement. If you just start thinking about retirement when you're 65 and getting ready to retire, it's too late. It really is too late. There are some things I would tell you to try to quickly do, but honestly, I tell people, have these discussions now. For instance, my daughter, who is an engineer at 29, I stay on top of, how much is going into her 401k. Thankfully, she's with a company that has a 401k. Make sure you're maxing this out. And these things, if you start early, then you won't have the struggle later. You won't have to do all this catch up that some people find themselves doing. And I think sometimes schools, we lack that. And unfortunately, everybody's home is not astute to teach that. But understanding budgeting, understanding spending, understanding finances is vital. So we do a lot with AARP. That just is from veterans to caregiving to healthcare to financial resiliency. We do a little bit of everything. And livable
Yeah, and
communities. Let me not forget that.
yeah, and just real quick before I get to their questions, I'm glad you mentioned that because look, I am far from a financial expert, but I'll be the first person to tell you, and everybody that knows I've said this in a magazine. Look, there's no disputing that rural communities, especially rural Black communities, were left
Yes.
behind on access and
Yes,
resources for decades. But
absolutely.
we've made a lot of progress in that. These
Hmm.
kids need to know if you don't want to go to college and you want to start working, that's fine. But if you
Yes,
don't put a max out of a 401k or IRA or
absolutely.
something aside every month,
Absolutely.
you are
Absolutely.
absolutely outside of your mind. Especially if that company
Absolutely.
matches it, you're gonna be
Yes,
working until you're 80. So
absolutely.
little things
Absolutely.
like that are just so important.
Absolutely. Of course, we actually do fight for Social Security. So we have some concerns going on now with Social Security. But in all honesty, I would just tell you, plan for not having Social Security. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but
Oh,
for this
thank you.
generation
Thank you.
that's listening
I'm
to
glad
me,
somebody besides me
plan
finally said that.
for not having Social Security. Just tell yourself, and to be very honest, let me also break it down. Those that have like the $5,000 or $6,000 check a month, those are also individuals that have had, high dollar careers. So that's not the norm. Most people barely get a $1,200 a month check in Social Security. So, in all honesty, you cannot survive on Social Security. Even now, you can't survive on Social Security. That is a very, very, I mean, that's a tight living expense. But I want you all, everyone that can hear me, just say it's not going to happen. So whatever you do get it, that's just some extra, but that's just some play money. But just plan that it's not even going to be there. So if you tell yourself right now, okay, the government is not coming to save me. I will not have any money. So now I need to focus on making sure that I put aside the right money. That whether that's between different brokerage accounts, maxing out, your 401k. And the thing about, well, none of you all are there, but when you get 50 and older, that's also what we say, make sure you max out your catch-up amount. So you need to make sure that you're planning those spaces. I won't say most people, but a good many of people will also be able to do what we call the 401k and then the Roth IRA, which is an excellent tool. If you make more money than some, then you will actually want to do max out your 401k and then max out a traditional IRA. So it's still stuff there, and then you can just have your plain old brokerage account, but you need to be astute in knowing what you're doing when you're dealing with a brokerage account. But the thing is now, something you right now could take $100, literally $100 on a mechanism like a SoFi, for instance, and chop something in a big ETF. That's a pretty popular one. You know, at your age, if you just started putting that amount into there each month, and then of course when you start working and have real salary, up the amount that you put into it, you would be really good in about 30 years. You would be really, really good financially. And some of us also just don't know how to set a budget. I see this stuff on, social media, and it's every age. It's not just the young people. I see people my age and older talking about they're balling out of control. Honey, do not ball out of control, or you are going to be broke and destitute when you are older. So, yes, there's the balance. Have some fun, treat yourself. But look, there are things that, depending on what the price is. If I say I'm going to get myself X in 2025, I'm not getting it again in 2026. If I spent crazy money on something, it's good. It will be good for a while. So, and always make sure that your first thing with money is to pay yourself first. But that pay yourself first is not for you to treat it and spoil yourself. Pay yourself first is to make sure you got your emergency savings account. You're putting your money towards your investments, whether it's 401k, IRA. Make sure all of that stuff is good. And don't take on debt. Oh my gosh, this country has such a debt problem. I mean, it's atrocious. It's
Yeah,
atrocious, unfortunately.
don't even start me on that one.
Yeah,
But I do have
yeah,
some questions
yeah.
from students. I'll get as many of these as I can.
Okay,
I like this first one. This is Lucridger Harris. He's in ninth grade, and he asked, "Did you always
okay.
want to be an attorney, and what made you choose to be one?"
Oh, I want to say yes. I mean, I remember maybe when I was much younger, because I'm a big animal lover. I've grew up with a lot of animals, and even right now, I've got two dogs and two cats. I've got a purebred German Shepherd and a Doberman. So yeah, I'm a big dog person too. So when I was younger, I used to think veterinarian, but I would say definitely we were junior high back then. I know y'all are middle school, but from junior high through high school, much thought about, going into law. Yeah, that just started to be shaping up pretty well. It was between that and I wanted to be in Congress. So I didn't get to Congress, but I did get to the state house legislature. But I think it's because, again, the family I came from was very dynamic in social issues and civil rights issues and big on education. I mean, I came from a family that was like, it was not even a question about you going to college. It was always a question about, like, college wasn't even discussed. It was like, whatever. Now, what we want to discuss is, what are you going to get your master's in? Like, that was just, I mean, look, my parents laid that law down when we were very young. I mean, it just was not even up for discussion. So when you come from that, and then you see the work that your parents have done, and the change. In fact, my mother is an exhibit at the Civil Rights Museum. Now they change it sometimes, but usually several times a year, her exhibit will be up. And so when you come from that, well, then, things become more real, which is why I do things like this, because I do understand that everybody does not come from that. And so I'm not, oblivious to that. And so that's why I try to, reach out and do as much, community outreach as possible. Because if you're not around it, your world can become really small, and it can almost seem like, well, this is just a fairy tale. That doesn't really happen. That can't happen just for me. And I always want young people to know, yes, it can. Anything can happen for you, but you got to be a hard worker. I'm telling you, I cannot tell you how much I would take. In fact, when I used to hire students, at youth court and even in the legislature to be pages, I always said, I can take a C student that has a heart of gold and will work themselves into the bones before I take an A student that thinks they know everything. And that is a very true statement. I'm still like, even when I hire people, I still think like that. I am all about people that are teachable. You have to be teachable. You don't know anything. I know you young people think you do, but you do not. And so you have to be teachable, and you have to want to put in that extra work and know that things are not just going to be easy. And so because of all of that, law just seemed like it fit the bill for most things that I wanted to do. And I've always wanted to do something that was going to impact people's lives. And so that's why law and politics were always a good marriage for me.
Absolutely. This is Kamani Wright. He's in ninth grade, one of our state runner-up powerlifters. And he asked, what has been the
Wow.
biggest, yeah, he asked, what is the biggest obstacle you've had to face in your career?
Oh, that's a good one. The biggest obstacle. Wow. Oh, hmm. That's such a multi-layered question. So one thing I would say, well, several things. Let me give you one from when I first started practicing law. And it was a case that was that I won't name the town, but it was a small rural town. It was about an hour from the Jackson area. And I walked into court, and it's an area that everybody looks like your teacher. Nobody in there looked like me. Most of the town did not look like me, from the opposing attorney to the staff nobody in there looked like me but me, right? And I was representing somebody that looked like me. And so, and it was dealing with an adoption. And it was interesting because it was a family that had these children. They looked like me. The children did not look like me, and which happens quite often when you're dealing with whether private adoption or when you're dealing with state adoptions. People that are foster parents, they have the heart of gold. They will take in whomever, and sometimes they just fall in love with the children, and they're like, "Look, these children have been through enough. I want to adopt," and it happens all the time. Now, this same court I had been in once before, where the children uh, looked like me, but the parents did. There was no problem that day. No problem that day when the parents didn't look like me, but the children did. No extra questions. They were applauding these parents. They were just the best thing. They were so glad that they took these yada yada yada. Fine. Starting back again, but the opposite. It was so apparent the difference in that room. The judge was asking demeaning, and it got to the point that the judge themselves started wanting to ask questions of the adoptive mother and father. And because I'm a code girl, so I know the code, I know what you're supposed to do. And I basically had to stop and say, well, this is inappropriate. Things like how many sexual partners this person had. Things about, well, how could you afford? I mean, very just horrible things. Well, I will hurry this along. And I would tell you, it was not a pleasant day that day in court, but I held my ground. And I went as far as saying, I think this may have to be escalated to the Justice Department, quite honestly, because
Wow.
this sounds like this is a racial issue. This sounds like, and of course, once I brought down all this stuff, and I think I said something about the media, all this stuff that I was getting ready to do. And then all of a sudden they were like, okay, we're fine. We were going to go on and approve it. So I'll say the obstacle there is that sometimes, even as you said, with these three SEC degrees and all these rooms I've been in, I am still a Black woman. And especially in the state of Mississippi, and in some parts that are still quote unquote what we call sundown town, I am still less than. I am still perceived as not being intelligent. I am still perceived as I can say what I want to this person. And then there's a shock when they realize they cannot, and I will not stand for it. And nor will I also ever be in a room and have anybody else being disrespected also because of color or whatever it is. And so I think and that's kind of opposite I would say throughout. I mean, there was an instance when I was in the legislature. I've told this before that so when you first get into legislate, there's a book. It's kind of like a yearbook, right? It has all of our pictures and our names and all our degrees, and especially the beginning of the session. And usually for new members, everybody likes to read up about the new members. And the day that this was out, I had a member. He's no longer there. I won't call his name. This was, oh my gosh, this is probably what, 18 years ago now. But he walks up to my desk and he just kind of throws the little picture book in front of me. And first of all, you all just have to know I don't do well with people being funny and silly. It just does not. I don't operate that way. And he was just kept pointing at it and turn up his nose. And my first thing was, first of all, you use your language skills. Speak to me. I was like, hello, how are you? I said, what can I help you with? Because you just walked up to my desk, threw this book in front of me, and then you're pointing at it like I'm a dog that's supposed to do a trick or something. And so finally he goes, well, I read this, and I just have to say, I could not understand what he was talking about. So I finally looked at it, and I realized it was my picture, just reading the things I had done, the schools I grabbed, my degrees and everything. And I was like, again, sir, use your language skills. What are you trying to get across to me? And he finally said, well, like, I just don't believe in it. That can't possibly be true. And I said, what are you referring to? Because I'm still totally shocked at the whole exchange. Then he actually said, where he said, is that all true? You really went to those schools? Well, I guess no, I'm not going to say I can't use the words in front of you all that I used that day. But I got my point across that, yes, indeed, it was all true. And how dare you? How dare you? Especially considering we have members of the legislature that don't even have a degree. So then I had to go there and I had to read them about, you don't even have a degree. And here I am with 3. Yeah. And so again, this still goes back to, I do understand that, especially in the South and especially in a state like Mississippi and really anywhere, I'm a Black woman. I'm never going to change. I will never not be. But I still do not let that harden my heart. I know people who get hardened by that. And then to me, they do just as much damage because then they think where everybody white is a certain way or everybody Hispanic is a certain way. And I just would not let hate win, right? I mean, my family is very multicultural, multiracial. I mean, and so I'm going to let a person show me who they are, whether that's a Black person, because just because they look like me doesn't mean they're going to be an ally or friend. That's important to know too, young people. Make sure you never, get confused with that. Just like in case they don't look like you does not mean they're always going to be an enemy. And so I have some wonderful friends that are of every race, every color, every culture, every religion. I love them all, and they're all wonderful people. And I think my life is richer because I have been open to embracing others. But yes, when it approaches me, I'm ready for the battle, and I think that's what everybody has to be ready for.
Awesome. Well, we're almost out of time, and we thank you so much for fitting us in. But a couple things before we go, and I just think this is so important because tomorrow we've got local elections all over our state. Whether you live in
Yes,
Florida, whether you live in Ridgeland, Madison, Canton, Jackson, Flowood, I'm voting the Flowood election tomorrow. It is just so
yes,
important. And look, I am never going to tell a young person who they need to vote for. First of
absolutely.
all, you asking me for political advice, you asking the wrong person.
Yes,
I'm not. No. Second, everybody's issues are important to different people. So
Yes,
what's important to
absolutely.
me may not be important to somebody else. So
Correct.
it's not my
Correct.
place to tell you how to vote, but I am going to tell you you need to be in somebody's voting booth voting for somebody.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's
Yes.
if you look at the
Yes.
history of our state, one of my heroes is Medgar Evers. Medgar Evers was killed in his
Yes.
front yard for everybody to have the
Yes.
right to vote.
Yes.
So
Yes.
again, I don't care
Absolutely.
who in the flip somebody votes for, but as these kids start to turn 18 and get registered to vote, every time there's an election, not just the president, anytime you
Everything.
can make a decision, help make a decision for affects your everyday life, you
Correct.
need to be in there voting for somebody. So why is
Correct.
it so important for these kids to know what's going on in these local elections and be in there voting for someone?
Oh my gosh. Just what you just said. I mean, there's not a better example than talking about Medgar Evers. In fact, we're very close to the Evers family. My mother and Medgar and Mr. Charles Evers were all, closely connected. So I know the Evers family quite well. But I also have a memory of at one point when growing up, my great aunt had to move in with us. She was, just getting older, and that's what we do in the South, right? And she believed in voting. I mean, I don't care if it was for dog catcher. She was gonna go vote. At the time, this was a woman that was almost 90. She had spent most of her time growing up in the Delta in Clarksdale, so her life was very different. And she had stories of when she was younger and was trying to register. This is not what I read in a book. This is family. Passing down generational knowledge. And she would tell us how, she would go and they would ask her, how many bubbles were in a bar of soap, or put a jar in front of her and say, how many marbles are in this jar? I mean, things, but again, when you're at the foot of that, like I was, it becomes more real than when you just hear stories about it. And I remember there was one election, and she was to the point where she was getting pretty ill and she was on a walker. And I remember, I think I must have been 16 or 17 at the time. And I remember telling, I was like, oh, TC, you don't have to go. I mean, it was like this particular day, it was storming cats and dogs. I was like, oh, TC, you don't have to go. I said, we got to get the walk and all this type of stuff. And it's storming. You don't need to get out there in that rain like that. And she got me all the way together. You hear me? She gave me a history lesson that took me from Adam and Eve to present day. But I learned in that moment, and she said, voting is never about convenience. She said, it's never about convenience. She said, remember, there was a time I couldn't even register to vote. She said, and so I think about, the other relatives of the family that have died from voter registration, the Evers family, everything they went through. And so she was very adamant about, you always do this because it is meant too much. Because if it wasn't that important, people wouldn't have always wanted to stop people like us from having the right to vote. So clearly there's power
Absolutely.
in voting. So that was always really important to me. But from just the civil rights thing, because I think sometimes young people today feel so far removed from that, right? I mean, it really sounds like ancient history to young people. So I would say this though. Your local elections impact your lives more than even the president, and that tells some grown people that, they love to say, oh, it's not a presidential race, I'm not going. If it's just the midterms, I'm not going.
So
And I always tell
so
them, let me tell
stupid.
you something. Midterm elections, honestly, you need Congress more than you need the president, because if you put the right people in Congress, they can kind of control the power that the president has. So that's always important. And if you trickle it on down to your state house elections, like what I was, it is imperative of the people that you send down to the state house. These people impact your day-to-day lives as a resident of the state of Mississippi. And then if you trickle on down further that to the municipality level, which is what's happening tomorrow, every place in Mississippi, for the most part, there are a few outliers that have a little different statutory setup, but most municipalities will have a mayoral race beginning tomorrow. And that's important. Who your mayor is, who your council is, or if you're in an area that has a board of aldermen, these people truly impact your day-to-day life from your address. What happens where you live is who is on the ballot tomorrow. And I tell people, right, I don't tell you who to vote for, but I will always tell you to vote. But I will also tell you to always educate yourself. And I don't mean by
Absolutely.
Facebook people. There are a lot of Facebook people that I don't know. Somebody thought they told them that they are the voice of the people, and they are just as much fake news as what you hear other people say with the national news. Pay attention to the right national news outlets. Pay attention to the right local news outlets. And then research yourself. I used to tell people when I was in the legislature, there's not a vote I have taken or anyone else that you cannot see and find. So when people are standing in front of you, saying that, for instance, if somebody's standing in front of you and they say, I am for expanding Medicaid or for, getting away with the grocery sales tax. Well, when you saw what they did last year with those same bills and they voted against it, we have to ask yourself, really represent what is an issue for me, and so don't just listen to the people, follow their record, see how they have voted, be a part of the process. If more people would educate themselves in every age group, and really exercise their right to vote, we would have far better people in office. I promise you we would.
Absolutely. Well, again, it's always a pleasure for you to join us. Hopefully, your schedule allows you to come on campus again sometime. We always love to have you. My good friend Kimberly Campbell, State Director
Yes,
of AARP. Thank you so much for joining us today.
thank you, thanks for having me. Y'all have a good one.
I talk to you soon, buddy.
Bye bye.